foolish enough to take the stairs. I'm Tris Lumley, I'm Director of Development at NPC, New Philanthropy Capital. We're not new, we're not just about philanthropy, and we haven't got any capital, so we go by NPC most of the time. We are very much known as impact geeks. For any of you who know NPC, that's very much what we do. We're all about impact measurement, and we've been very much part of the movement to encourage and support the social sector and its many stakeholders and other sectors in making progress on measuring impact, understanding it, managing it, learning and improving, reporting it, all of that good stuff. So I'm delighted to be here to just chair the session today and not say very much at all. I'll introduce the panellists this morning. They're then going to run through some slides of their own, but I do want to make sure that there's lots of time for questions. And so actually I'd like to spend a couple of minutes at the beginning hearing questions from the floor or things that you really think we should be talking about. The big challenges, the controversies, the debates. I don't want us to just be saying, three people saying a bunch of stuff and everyone nods and we go off. And that's it. I think there's an opportunity to get to some of the nitty-gritty and some of the difficult issues that we face. So if that's all right with everyone. When we do that, I'd ask, because this is being broadcast, that if you ask a question, we'll then sort of repeat it from here, just so that people who are watching out there can see as well. So if I run through the panellists, so we have Matt Roberts from Interserve with us today, and he's going to talk about the social value mapping tool, as well as other things. Dan Such from CAST, the Centre for the Acceleration of Social Technology. He's going to talk about digital and data and those good things. And Heather Black from Economic Change, KIC. He's going to talk about the work they do helping organisations to measure and the kind of systems around that. So I hope we'll have a great session. I'm sure we will. Before we kick off, I just want to say that from my own perspective, as I said, I'm an impact geek. I'm passionate about the potential and the importance of us focusing on real data about our social impact, about our social value, and using that. I'm an optimist. I'm also a pessimist at the same time. And I think that in the discussion about what we can achieve, we also need to be realistic. We need to be practical. We need to be fundamentally aware that we need to be accountable to the stakeholders that we're here to serve. We're not here for our organisations. We're here to make a difference in people's lives. So this stuff really, really matters. And I think we also need to be aware that this is kind of an emerging field in lots of ways. And so there's really great practice out there, and there's some not so good practice. And in fact, some people who were kind of commenting on this session on Twitter yesterday and beforehand were talking about the discussion of social value and data being a bit like magic beans. So I don't think any of us are interested in magic beans, but let's be alive to the possibility that there is stuff out there that isn't really meaningful. And there's data that's being used purely for marketing, not really to learn, improve, and hold ourselves accountable. So, let's be ambitious and aspirational, but maybe skeptical and realistic at the same time. I don't think anyone thinks there are magic bullets or magic beans, and we don't want to be taken in by charlatans. We want to be really making progress on this stuff. So now I've said my bit, I should do a proper chairing job and not have opinions. I'd also really like us to, when we're talking about data, to be clear about what data are we talking about. There's lots of chat about data. It's not just, hooray, data is great. What data are we actually talking about? How is it being used? How will we use it? Let's be really focused and practical. So if that's all right, before I hand over to Matt, are there any questions that people have, things that you think we need to talk about, big challenges in terms of social value data? Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Leacher from HACT, which is a housing-focused think tank. We found working in housing, which is quite a data-rich environment, that despite that, the quality of core business data is often so poor that it's quite hard to even make a start on trying to understand what's going on in businesses, let alone trying to get your head around the social value return. And that seems quite difficult and important, because increasingly businesses are wanting to look at the combination of social value and bottom line return. You know, getting somebody into a job creates social value, but does it also reduce the wear and tear on a property that I'm having to pay to look after? Do you think we're yet at a stage where talking about big data and social value is a useful thing to do? Do we not just need to start talking about data to start with?
That's a great question. I hope we'll cover that. We'll have time for sort of coming back to the questions, but maybe people can address as we go through. Certainly, one of the quotes about big data is that it's like teenage sex. Everyone's talking about it, but not so many are really doing it. And I think starting from the perspective of getting data to a level of quality where it can actually be used before going off into highfalutin and talk about big data, I think there's certainly an important aspect of being realistic there. Again, I'm not supposed to have opinions. I'm going to stop myself. Other questions?
I guess my question is, who are the consumers of big data, social value data? Should we be looking at making data available to people who aren't particularly data literate and finding ways of making it accessible to them? Or is it always just going to be used by big organisations?
Okay, great question on who are really the consumers, the customers of big data, and should our focus be on data for bigger organisations, or should it be about data literacy across the board? Great question. Okay, well, I think that gives us a great starting point. So, Matt, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Tris. Good morning. Welcome. I'm going to talk a bit about the weather. What's the weather got to do with big data? I'd just like to say that I had actually come up with a half-decent segue from magic beans and magic bullets to magic maps, and then he started talking about teenage sex, and I haven't got one for that. So anyway, thanks. I'm going to talk a bit about the weather because I'm going to talk a lot about geospatial data and how we can... can you see the weather? Yes, I've got the right slide now. Talk a lot about sort of geospatial data and how we can use that and why we choose to use it. But I thought I'd better start off about saying why are we talking about maps? Because one of the things that one of the other areas of enormous amounts of data that we have for a very long time been consuming on a daily basis, on a multiple occasions on a daily basis, on an almost hour by hour, minute by minute, if you've got the right app basis, is weather information. Weather information is fantastically complicated, but it also means different things to different people. And it's all about the context in which you're trying to consume weather data that makes whatever it is relevant to you. So these people have a very different view of the weather from this gentleman or from this woman. It all means something different, depending on what you're wearing, where you are, what you're doing, how well equipped, how well trained, are you alone, are you with friends? There's a whole bunch of things around weather data that we've had to assimilate. We've had to find a way of making common currency. And somebody asked about those who are less data literate. I don't think any of us are data literate enough to be able to understand raw weather data, but most of us understand the impact of this data has on our daily lives from very, very simple images. We can take very complex meteorological environments such as this and turn it into relatively straightforward maps such as this. Now, I don't know, but I don't think many of us can understand that. Anybody in the room? Oh, it's that exciting, we've got to leave. Anybody understand it? No, but most of us understand what that means. So that's quite good. And we've been doing it for a very long time. Some of us can remember when we used to dress like this.
I think that's still in fashion, isn't it?
It might be in certain locations. I mean, Peter was wearing a waistcoat very similar to that on the stadium this morning, on the main stage. Anyway, and our ability to understand and portray this data, this really complex data, has got better over time. So we now have quite sophisticated mapping tools, mapping images. We've got moving graphics. We've got all sorts of bits and pieces on our apps and on our telephones and on the TV and so on. This data comes from an incredibly broad range of platforms. Some of them super sophisticated, like this. Some of them ridiculously remote, like this. Some of them incredibly local, like this. Okay, and if you look at weather data, if you look behind what turns up on your phone or on your TV screen, or you look behind what turns up on the shipping forecast, some of the information comes from weather stations that are as simple as this. They aren't these fantastically sophisticated, complicated weather stations, or things floating in space, or ridiculously clever buoys floating in the middle of nowhere, or enormous supercomputers. It just comes from very simple Met stations. When I was an undergraduate, one of my great joys, at the same time every morning, BST, GMT, it didn't matter, was going out and taking the Met station readings at one place that I was doing a placement at. A deep joy. I didn't take it very seriously until the Met office said, would you like to come and get some training? And I thought, that's kind of them. And I went to Bracknell, not the most exciting place in the world, and had all my rubbish data presented to me. And all of a sudden I realised, actually, I was an incredibly small cog in the machine. It was quite an important cog in the machine. And actually, I couldn't do Met station readings from under the duvet, which it has to be said on occasions I did do. That's going to be broadcast to the world now. Oh, damn. Anyway, let's talk a bit about what this mapping stuff looks like. We all kind of, roughly speaking, know what a map looks like. This is a map of the UK. And what we've been doing with an Interserve is trying to see our business in context. But first of all, we've been tackling that first challenge, which is the business data. As Adrian has already mentioned to us, we are an organisation of 85,000 people. We turn over about £3.5 billion a year. We do an awful lot of work in a lot of different places. It's the classic kind of corporate story. So you'd think we'd be really good at this. It has to be said, to get to this map, hang on, get the right one up, that map, which is where all our staff live, has taken a year. Not around data security, we've got to deal with all that as well, but around just finding this information and actually sense checking it. So what we've been trying to do is understand where we do the things that we do. Where does our impact happen? And we've chosen to look at where our staff start off by living. Because the easiest piece of information for us to track is payroll. I say easy, it wasn't easy. However, so this is where our staff live, and you can see you can't see, and I get, every time I put this slide up, my wife were here, and if she were watching this, I'm sorry, darling, Shetland's not on it, but we do have a member of staff who works in Shetland, and my wife was born in Shetland. Hence the sort of personal. But I mean, we haven't got that on here, but we do have staff at all four corners of the country, and you can see where the concentration of this. So I wanted to understand where our people were and where our payroll was flowing. So we then moved on to look at where some of our businesses are. So this is our Eden catering business. This is all the locations that we provide catering. So this is one bit of the business that happened to have mapped all of its localities, all of its places. And then we moved on to look at this, which is this is more around the, you can't really see this, can you? It's not very enormously helpful. But this is another set of our sites from another side of our business. And then let's zoom this into somewhere else a bit closer. This is Birmingham, and we start looking at places by postcode. And this is talking about what we do. So this is where we are. We can interrogate this by payroll. So this is where our pay goes. So depending on the colour scheme, you can see how much payroll goes into a particular postcode. And that's quite useful. None of this is really, this tells you about my business, tells you about what happens in my business, tells me about what happens in my business in Birmingham. And most people who are analysing their impact look at their business. They don't look at where their business does what they do. And context is incredibly important for me. So it's no good understanding how much payroll goes into a postcode if you don't know what the postcode looks like. So we've started to combine our data with public data. So this is our employee data based on mapped against multiple instances of deprivation. So we can now see the impact that we're having. And how many of our staff are in the most deprived communities in a locality. This is it when you look at headcount by postcode, again with multiple instances of deprivation. And then this is bringing the whole thing together this is some data from a contract we delivered for the West Yorkshire Police Authority, where we had a whole construction, design, build, deliver, maintain, continuing relationship. And they wanted to understand their impact. So this brings together supply chain, employees, volunteers, volunteering, apprenticeships, graduates, everything. Everything that we did on that contract was geospatially tagged and has been put into the mapping tool. So what we're trying to do now is build a better and more informed picture. And my kind of penultimate slide is a picture of this chap. And I can't decide whether I love him or hate him. This is the man that said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Which, like it or lump it, or like it or dislike it, is a mantra in a vast number of businesses, social enterprises, local government, central government, the voluntary sector, pretty much everywhere, really somewhere inside them, believes what Peter Drucker said. And I don't know if he's an enemy or whether or not he's a friend. I don't believe measurement is the end. I believe understanding is the end. And I think we need to pursue understanding as well as pursuing measurement. Measurement is a key point on the road to understanding. And why do we need to do this? Because we want to make better decisions. We need to make better decisions about how we run our business. So we need to understand the business, what happens, where do we spend our money on payroll, on procurement, where does it go when we're buying services of people. We need to know where that is happening, and we need to know what it looks like. So we use our mapping tool where we add in the multiple indices of deprivation, reported crime, average household economic income, house prices, travel to work. So a vast amount of public data out there. And our relatively modest amount of business data is added to it to create a whole picture. And I'm not interested in putting a GVA figure on this or an LM3 figure on it at the moment. I'm interested in using what I consider to be the two most powerful pieces of data processing that we have at our disposal, which is the Mark I eyeball and the human brain. Still, can't be beaten by any sensor or piece of IT that anybody has yet invented. So let's use our eyes and our brains to interpret the data, which is what we do with weather. So for me, we've got to use the data to make better decisions. We don't need to chase measures. We have to chase understanding, and better understanding will result in faster change. Because the one thing, and it was happening in a board meeting only yesterday, people didn't understand what change looks like, therefore they were reluctant to jump in with even 1 foot. So the mapping tool, I believe, can give us better understanding, and that means we can get faster change. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Matt. I'm just going to take Chair's prerogative and ask one follow-up question before we move on to Dan, if we can, because you talked about the point of measurement being then to manage. So,
no, I didn't. I said that wasn't the point of measurement.
Okay, right. The point of having data is to use it to make decisions.
Yes.
So I'm really interested in you just telling maybe one story, one example about how you're using this data actually then to change what you're doing. Are you looking to employ people in different areas?
Yes. So we can use it to focus recruitment. We can use it to try and drive change in our customers in terms of the questions they answer. A fairly relatively early use of the map was in one London borough who had beaten up one of our contract directors and said, "We're fed up with paying you millions of pounds, which all ends up in Reading." To which he looked slightly confused and said, "What do you mean Reading?" And they said, "Well, that's where your head office is. That's where all your money goes, isn't it? All our money goes to Reading." At which point he said, "No." I said, "Well, prove it." So I rocked up with the map and said, "Look, here is this particular contract. This is where all the people, this is the value of the contract, this is the proportion of the contract that's spent on the payroll, this is where the payroll lives." But funnily enough, most of them live in your borough. And this is where, this is the spend, this is the money that you give us that we use on procurement, the stuff that we buy. You know, we're a FM business and construction business, most of it's building materials, and most of it is spent with people like Travis Perkins, at which point they went, "Oh no, evil Travis Perkins!" And we said, no, there's a Travis Perkins depot that we use. Look, all the spend with Travis Perkins goes through the depot in your borough. So that's, I don't know how many jobs are in that Travis Perkins, 23. Well, a proportion of that is down to us. It's down to you, because we spend the money in your borough. And at the end of the day, what they realised was that probably well over 90% of the money that they spent through us ended up back in their borough. And that we couldn't have done that without mapping. And that's what I mean by understanding. We weren't measuring anything. What we were doing was making things visible and saying to a group of officers and councillors, actually, this is, you pay us this money, you're interested in empowering and delivering change and positive change in your borough, but we're doing that for you. You to be honest, if you signed up to some massive GLC-wide or GLA-wide procurement deal, you could be buying stuff from anywhere across London. Actually, we spend most of your money in your borough, and that's because we mapped it. And it was a really simple story to tell. I don't think that answered your question, for which I don't apologise.
Okay, there we go. That's how it's going to be. We'll come back to that later on. Thanks, Matt. Dan?
Thanks, Chris. So I'm going to take it from a slightly different angle, I think, when we're talking about social value. I should first introduce who I am. I'm Dan. I'm from CAST. We're a relatively new organisation. We're now 8 months old, and all of our work is focused on supporting charities, non-profits, funders to use technology for social good. For the last 5 years, though, I've been behind the strategy at Nominate Trust, which is a grant-making organisation, gives between £3 and £5 million per year to charities and non-profits and for-profits using tech for good. So that means I've been across supporting over 400 organisations over the past 4 or 5 years. And now specifically at CAST, we're focused on helping charities and organisations who've got really great ideas to use tech to achieve social objectives or charitable objectives who have got a really great idea but are really struggling to make it work at a decent enough scale to see the sorts of impact that we're talking about today. And there's it's a well, sadly, understood challenge in getting from a good early stage idea to getting to something that seems to scale. And one of the reasons for that is kind of depicted in this, which is we're really good at thinking about great projects, at thinking about great ideas, at theorising what we should do, at putting together great plans, often over 3 years, that are attached with a great funding process, and that ends up with people not going through, acting in the way in which we quite hope they will. That very often we design brilliant digital tools, as well as kind of programs, that don't quite align with the way in which people behave. Their intended behaviour isn't how they actually behave. So for me, the way in which we can really use social value data, the way in which we can really understand great impact and create great impact, is by understanding behaviour. That, for me, is the exciting bit about data. And in fact, it's one of the things that's most exciting for me about digital tech. Very often when we think about digital technology, we think about the scale of ambition or the way in which we can reach millions of people. The thing that excites me the most is we can observe people's behaviour with the stuff that we create, and we can change accordingly. We can respond to how people use the stuff we put together, whether it's a simple website or a complex tool, and we can change it. We can get rid of features and add new things in to ensure it relates to the social objective and the way in which people actually behave. So that's the take I'm going to take for now about the value of data, how we can understand people's behaviour. Now, if we had lots of time, I would talk about Centrepoint's Youth Homeless Database project. That's just awesome, check it out. I would talk about Matt's work at Hacked. It's awesome, check it out. It's really hard to make sense of big data, so I'm going to start at a slightly different perspective. One of the projects that I think is worth sharing, which you may know about, is called 360 Giving. Does anyone know that one? 360giving.org? Fantastic. So 360giving.org is a way of pulling together funders' funding in a consistent way. It's a standard. It's a set of headings on a spreadsheet that means that when they share what they're funding, they're sharing it in a way that can be compared. It's that kind of simple. It gets much more complex later on, but that's pretty much it. Now, what's really important about that as an idea, it's brilliant for funders. They can see, just as your map did, who else is funding in the same area, who else is funding the same charity. They can work out how they can have impact partnerships. They can work out where no one else is funding, and they can start directing funding there. It's really useful for all sorts of purposes. But for me, it also highlights their real behaviour. At Nominate Trust, we funded over 400 organisations when I was there. And on our website, we said very proudly that we funded charities, non-profits, and mission-driven organisations. We had reams of text on our site describing what we were trying to fund. We held events before people applied to us, trying to articulate what we wanted to fund. And yet we still had applications that were not relevant to us. We still had applications that we couldn't fund. Because there's something between what we were trying to say, this is what we want to fund, and our actual behaviour. There was a difference. And this helps identify the things that people are actually funding. And if you look at the funding from Nominate Trust, when I was there a year ago, it would describe the last lot of funding, 75% of it went to for-profit organisations that were trying to address a social problem. That's quite different from what we articulated on the website. That's not something we ever wanted to do, but that's where we were funding, where we saw the best ideas. So through the data we could share, you begin to surface some new insight into, actually, the way in which that funder behaves means that's not an organisation I should spend my time with. Or actually, they're the people we should really be chasing. And the reason that's useful as a set of data is when it gets used by awesome tools like behavegiving.org.uk. Now, this is quite an early stage project. We're supporting it at the moment, so I'll kind of make that clear. But they use that data of funders' real behaviour, and they match it to the sorts of projects that charities are looking to get funded. So it's different from saying, let's go to a grants register that kind of has a great database of all the possible funders. It's different going to individual grant funders' websites and saying, do they fund the sort of stuff? You can use this sort of tool to go, this is the project I want, this is who I am, who has already funded stuff like this, and therefore give me a good chance if I spend some time going through an application. It's a really great insight into funder behaviour that can match with charities' real objectives. And hopefully we can use that data to create projects that are funded more easily and can grow more easily. I get quite excited by that. But I get even more excited, though, when we take it from that sort of level and we think about how we develop new projects. One of the reasons that we often don't see brilliant projects operating at scale is we really focus, possibly rightly, on trying to create social value. Of course we are. That's what our sector does, right? Great products don't do that. Great products have to create, great social tech projects have to create three sorts of value, otherwise they cannot succeed. They have to create social value, of course. They have to create financial value, that is a way of continuing to sustain and to grow them. They also have to create user value, and that's creating something that people actively choose to use. For-profit organisations do this brilliantly. Financial value and user value. Get someone to use it, get someone to pay for it. That's all you have to do. We have to do those two things and create social value. And the reason that's difficult is very often we don't behave in the way in which we know we should. And without looking at anyone, just think for a moment about things that you know you should do more or less of, whether it's smoking, texting whilst driving, drinking too much, going to the gym, whatever it is, there's something that intellectually we know we should do, but we don't do. All of the services that we create have to meet those two things, things that people know that we should do and meet the way in which people behave. So from day one of every project that we look at, from day one of every project we support, we try to understand what's the data point that's giving us confidence that we're growing the social value. What's the confidence that we can grow the user value, get more people to actively choose to use it? What's the thing that's going to give us confidence that we can improve the financial value? And all the way through, we focus on those three things. Going to Matt's point, there's another important strand in here, which is how the organisation develops. Understanding the whole metrics of how we run an organisation helps us become more efficient. If the principal objective of our work is social objectives, all of those data points are important in helping us realising it. If we run a bad organisation, we're not going to achieve social value. If our technology is not well developed, we're not going to achieve the social value. If we can't get people to use the thing, we're not going to realise any social value. If we can't create financial income, we're not going to create social value. So if we're looking at the big picture of how do we create social impact, what data can we create, it starts with lots of small things across all of those areas. It sounds horribly complicated, as if our jobs now are just mining and capturing data, but that's not the case. However, what we do is we use something called a missed growth approach, which is measuring integrated social tech growth. This comes from something called lean metrics. So what's the thing that every week or every month gives you confidence you're heading in the right direction? That's a data point you can collect. If you're looking at your social value, how you've improved someone's life, that's necessarily a long-term measure. It's quite difficult to make sure you're heading in the right direction. So what's the thing that gives you that confidence you're going in the right direction after week one, after week two? So week one, people are turning up to our session. That's awesome. Or they're giving us good feedback in our co-design sessions. That's great. That's giving me confidence we're heading in the right direction. After month two, we're seeing people beginning to use the tool we're creating. That's giving me confidence they're actively choosing to use it. We've had some good conversations with funders. That's giving me confidence that we can create some income. We haven't done it yet. All those things give you confidence until you go, now we've got some money from a local authority. Now we've got 100 users. Now we've got some survey feedback to demonstrate that it's improving someone's life. They've created a new connection. And all we're doing is using lots of small indicators that give us confidence that we're heading towards that big, shiny social impact thing in the sky. So I'll end with the characteristics of those metrics, because this is at the heart of creating that great big social impact data stuff. It's the metrics that really matter. We talk about lean metrics because they're things that give us confidence to head in the right direction. So we're looking for small indicators that give us confidence we're heading in the right direction. We're looking for indicators that change our behaviour. That is, if someone's not using it in the way we want to, then we'll stop and we'll go in another direction. We have to be able to respond to the data. And then finally, and this goes back again to Matt's point, this is about efficiency, not vanity. We can stand here and say we want to see social value data. Of course we do. We want the world to be a better place, more fair and equitable. We get there by being really efficient organisations. We get there by having efficient tools that focus on getting people to use the things that we're creating in a way that helps them improve their lives. It's hard. That's why we're such an awesome sector. But by using metrics that have those characteristics, then over time we can create the whole database of the way in which we can change and improve people's lives. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I think that's a fantastic run-through of a lot of really important concepts. And the user, social and financial value coming together, I think, is something we'll probably come back to at the end, because it's clearly crucial. I do wonder how much of the data that others are asking our organisations for live up to the rubric of being about important metrics, not vanity metrics. So maybe we can come back to that too. Let's hand over to Heather. You can tell us about your work at Economic Change.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I think my slides feed on nicely from what we've talked about so far. At Economic Change, I established it 10 years ago. My passion for what we do stems from 5 years between 2000 and 2005 evaluating public sector regeneration programmes. So one of my first projects was evaluating an SLB programme in Crystal Palace. I was just stuck on the road and tasked with evaluating this whole programme at the age of 22. And I worked also with BITC on evaluating one of their programmes funded by the Home Office at 22 as well. So I've had really interesting experience. What I found, one of my bugbears was I'd go into organisations and they'd tell a great story, but they couldn't give me stats. You know, they would have to root around for it. They weren't perhaps capturing exactly what they should be capturing for the funded programmes quite often. And so my role was really to pull through that data through quantitative, you know, the surveys they'd done, and also the interviews, and to capture that story and to go back and tell the government about, you know, what was great about the programme, where, you know, strengths were, where weaknesses were, where you could recommend it. And so it kind of, for those 5 years, kind of set me on a road of going, well, okay, I want to help these organisations at the grassroots demonstrate the impact they have. And so I set up, Economic Change was part of another organisation called Striding Out that I set up 10 years ago, which supported young people into education, employment and training. And Economic Change, if you like, was our consultancy arm that specialised in consultancy around social entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurship at that time. And we worked with organisations such as the Prince's Trust and National Council for Youth Voluntary Services, a whole range of organisations to help them measure their impact. And what's important for me is that there's a really structured process that you should go through. So obviously we're talking about systems and data collection in this, but it's really clear there's a cycle that you will need to go through as an organisation. And that's really about developing a social impact framework. So being really clear about what it is that you should be measuring in the first place, and making sure that what you're measuring is important to all of your stakeholders, and building out that theory of change model, if you like, to start with. The next stage is about putting in really good monitoring processes. So whether that's an online form somebody fills in as part of an application form, an evaluation form, or even a diagnostic, or if it's a telephone conversation or a mentoring session, what is a process that you're going to collect all this data back through? Because fundamentally, the next stage is ideally where do we collect all of that data? And now my passion is going into organisations who live off spreadsheets and going, right, we're going to cleanse. We are going to take this data from spreadsheets and we're going to put it in a system so you have real-time analytics, and about making everything sophisticated. So basically your staff, your volunteers, your beneficiaries are inputting data into your system in lots of different ways, and you have a great system which produces real-time data analytics. And that is amazing, because I liken it to a dragon's den. We've obviously talked about financial things. If you went to a dragon's den, which might be your commissioner or a funder, and they said, okay, so tell me about your turnover, you could probably say it. Tell me about your impact data. You need it to hand, like you need that dashboard you can show them. They need it there real time. And with some of our clients that we work with, the funder actually has open access to that dashboard real time. Like, that is open data. And I think that is brilliant, because it means it's transparent. It's like what Dan was saying, is actually you can make that data visible on your website and to anybody that wants to know it at any point in time. And why shouldn't we be that transparent and honest about it, particularly around the headlines that have been, you know, around where's our money going, what's it been spent on. So my ultimate goal is to help organisations be very clear about what they're tracking, make sure they've got a system and approach with real-time data that is visible to anybody that wants to see it. Obviously, you can make that choice within your organisation. But, you know, it's not just down to the sustainability consultant or the impact management manager to track all of this. All your stakeholders have a role in helping collect and manage this data. Now, the approach that we take, we do use Salesforce, but there are other systems out there that track it. The reason why we got involved in Salesforce is they do offer temporary licenses and discounts to non-profits, but also they've been very heavily focused on getting their system secure for public sector type contracts as well, and it's used by corporates. It's just an example of a tool, but I'd certainly look at it as best practice of what a system can do for you when you're comparing other systems as well. And this... really, the type of intervention we do is around stakeholder. A system should be able to track stakeholder interaction, stakeholder engagement, should be able to track stakeholder management metrics and quality, customer performance, and also your impact measurement. So really you want a system that does everything for you. And that's why I focus on a CRM, because it's a business, when we implement a system for organisations, it's not just about impact. It's actually about, let me look at Joe Blogs and see everything that we've ever done. It's that 360-degree view of like, when was the last phone call to them? What was their last challenge? Who did they last interact with? What was their last outcome? And that is market intelligence. So it's about having complete, utter transparency about all your beneficiaries, all of your volunteers. So if that member of staff sadly leaves, somebody else comes in and that whole history is retained there. So it's about 360-degree view. It's about intuitive client relationships. We've got to uphold customer service. It's something commissioners are wanting to know about strongly. It's about improved team visibility and everybody working much more effectively together. It's about faster response times in terms of being able to respond to customers and stakeholders more readily. And it's about improved security of data, because again, Excel spreadsheets don't really cut it now in terms of a lot of compliance around commissioning. And so it's about getting a system that holds that data securely. So I'm just going to show you some examples of how systems have been done. So volunteer management is an area which might be relevant to social value. Kinds of things that you want to track for social value here is maybe around in-kind value of your volunteers. So quite often that can be a London waiting salary price, or it could be that you have a scale. So if you've got a board member volunteering, maybe their day rate is a certain rate versus more of an admin staff day rate. So can you get real-time analytics about the added value in financial pounds that you're adding to contracts alongside cash circulation? It's about the health and the outcomes of those volunteering, and that's both in corporate and non-profit world, because that similarly there's outcomes for both. So it's not about number of hours. I've got a dashboard here which is number of hours, but it's also about impact outcomes for your volunteers. It's about financial cash. It's about the diversity of the volunteers that you're hiring and generating. I'm talking about building on geography, absolutely. In the systems, you can pull out the geography and map where they all are automatically. So you've kind of got that data, again, that touched a button that I need to find a volunteer in this area, basically it comes together. The same around frontline delivery. We've worked with a lot of organisations in frontline delivery. Again, it's just those key points around diversity of attendees and beneficiaries, what their outcomes are, and tracking all of that sort of data. My last point, though, and I think this builds on the big data thing, this is that I love working with infrastructure organisations because that's where the big data becomes most powerful. So we've worked with quite a few infrastructure organisations. Locality has been one of my most favourite clients over the last few years. They had £32 million worth of grants to give out to neighbourhood organisations all over the UK. We built their CRM to track everything they do. To touch the button, you can see who they're supporting in which areas, what type of legal structure they are, how many hours of support they've got, and it's also tracking the type of outcomes, because it's something that the funder wants to see. And DCLG have a login to their system, so they can see all of this at any point in time. And so they're tracking both business support and grants. And the data held by these infrastructure organisations is really powerful, because that's where the big data starts coming together, if you like. And I think there's a real role for infrastructure organisations to take this and make it visible. Don't just hold it for, internal knowledge. Well, how can we make this visible to other organisations? Because they're the ones that hold the power. And if you like, all these relationships with organisations across the UK, SE UK is in a similar space. Cooperatives, we've done work with them around them supporting cooperatives all over the UK around their membership system. And International Centre for Social Franchising is quite exciting. We're just looking at social impact with them because they're across 3 different countries. And so using the system to track everything that you do, but also measure your impact, is where I'd like to see you all get to if you're not there already. And I champion those who are there. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for a run through some really practical sides of how we actually do this. And I think there's a lot there for us to, with 3 different perspectives, lots there in those different perspectives that we could dig into. We had a couple of questions beforehand around, is it about data quality first, or is it about really, are we in a world of big data? Should we even be talking about big data? We had the question about who's really the customer of this. Should we be talking about kind of sophisticated data use, or should we be talking about data literacy for everyone? I have lots of questions, but I'm not going to ask them, I hope. So let's pile in. We've got questions for the whole panel. I hope we can have a discussion around some of the thornier issues. So if someone wants to help kick that off, we've got a question, and maybe we'll take a couple at a time if we've got a couple of questions. So one over here. Well, get your thinking caps on.
I work in Oxfordshire, a community infrastructure support charity, and we work with very small groups. So my question is, all of this stuff looks really good and could perhaps be funded by big players. What is out there for free for the community shop that I'm supporting, or the parish council with a precept for £13,000 a year? How can they actually use these tools?
That's a great question, and I think in the current context where there's less funding around for smaller organisations, not more, it's absolutely crucial that we don't get focused on stuff that's too highfalutin. So the question was, what's out there that's free or accessible to smaller organisations? And maybe we can have some perspectives across the panel on that while someone else is thinking up a next question. Who wants to kick off? Heather?
Yeah, I can. We've helped. I mean, there's various funding pots out there that can pay for some of these tools, because I think with free, even off the shelf, it's not really customised to what that project's about. So, I mean, there's various funding there. Perhaps community shops can tap into, like Power for Change grants, and there are elements like that. And I think it's about tapping into those funding streams that are available for core infrastructure development of non-profits and charities, because that does exist at the moment, and about using that, because I think Salesforce, for example, give free licenses, and I was one of those that downloaded it in 2006 when I started my social enterprise, and I just sat there with it, not really knowing what to do for years before I saw how it actually worked. Because we had a project with Social Enterprise London, I was like, oh, we can do all of this, and I got excited. So I think there's a danger that you can download a free tool and not really grasp it. So I would advocate trying to get some funding or support, or even yourselves as an infrastructure organisation trying to get some money to kind of support these organisations to put in good systems so they can track things, or you help them do it as part of that role.
And Dan, the user social financial value, that applies to everyone, no matter how big or small, right?
Yeah, so the starting point for me is it's a process. It's nothing to do with this bit. So the first thing is, what's the stuff we need to find from our work to make sure we're doing it correctly? I mean, I know that sounds obvious because we do it anyway, but when that comes back in, what's the stuff that's going to change our behaviour? So, for example, if we track the number of people, can you give me an example of one of the community organisations you work with? We can try and run with that.
Okay, well, it's a village hall committee with loads of volunteers coming in and running the thing, and they make their money by hiring out their rooms.
Perfect. So you've already got kind of how much money's coming in. That's fine. You can see the kind of the speed at which it comes in different days and different times, all that kind of stuff. That's quite easy to track. I'm guessing someone's already tracking it for financial purposes. So the number of people who are volunteering and waiting to volunteer, and people who stop, all that kind of trend of how many people are there and not. And then the number of people who are coming to each of the sessions, if that's kind of logged on the register. Then already, just from that, you've got, okay, so are there times where the hall's not being used very well financially? Can we offer it at a discount to another charity just to get someone in there? Or if it's never, ever used on a Saturday, we don't need to pay someone to turn up, or whatever. So you can just use that data you've already got and say, whilst we're collecting this data, how will it change our behaviour? That's the first thing. And that's the same then for the numbers of people turning up. If no one ever turns up to that thing on a Thursday evening, maybe it's time to say we need to offer another service or another event at that time. And honestly, that kind of integrated growth thing that looks all kind of shiny, and that was started off in Excel or Google Sheets if you want to be slightly hipper. Just because we were just trying to work out what the process is. And there's a golden rule in creating amazing software, which is you can't automate anything until you understand your behaviours. So the first thing is, what do we want? If we just did it on a big piece of paper, what would we want to do? And then once you've got that, you go, right, what we really need is a way of kind of capturing that information then. Right, so we're going to start doing it on Excel or Google Sheets. And then we're going to start putting it through Salesforce. And then we're going to get a great big something. So, but I would just start off with that process. And then once you can prove that it's working, paper-based or using Excel or whatever, then start looking for the grant money to help you develop it further. And at that stage, when you've already got that process, there are organisations like DataKind who might come and who provide volunteer data experts. So once you say, look, we've got all this data, we're doing this great stuff, they can come and help you realise how to turn it into something wonderful.
Matt, maybe a flip side of that question is, should we actually be collecting any data if we're not using it within the organisation, if it isn't core to the business, whether you're a village hall or you're Interserve?
I think we probably have a pathological desire to collect data, and we quite often don't know why. It's a bit like collecting stamps or any other collecting-based activity. It's designed to fill up shelves in many cases, and nothing else. So I think to you, I would say it's not about what it's going to cost you in cash, because that's quite modest, and there are lots of sources of finance available. Actually, the work we've done hasn't cost a lot of money in cash at all. you would be able to afford what we've spent, in all honesty, in terms of the numbers you've just quoted. What you probably couldn't afford is the amount of time that we've spent on it, which is vast. You would not believe the number of different ways people can fill in a field that says postcode. Honestly, I didn't know, actually, arithmetically, you could come up with that many different variants of 8 different characters and a space. Honestly, it is days and days and days and days of people, I used to have hair. Actually, the person I didn't do any of this, somebody else did, and they probably were a lot younger at the time. But you've really, really got to understand your purpose. What is it? I'm in the business of trying to get people to understand the impact that our business has in the communities that it operates in. So I'm very much driven by understanding. I have reluctantly engaged with data geeks or data bunnies or whatever particular term you want to use, and that's mildly affectionate but slightly derisive. I've kept them at a distance. I mean, we've been working with a social enterprise called the Groundwork Trust, who have a very tiny little boutique GIS unit, which is basically 3 people, and they do an awful lot of work for a lot of other people, not just us. So in actual fact, the amount of cost and investment that we've made in terms of cash outlay is very modest. We've made a massive time investment in the work that we've done, and going forward, and we have plans for a data capture portal going down to tier 3 in our supply chain. I mean, that's going to be very much about effort. It's the data bit is your analogy of saying do it on a piece of paper for a long time before you go anywhere near a spreadsheet, which I personally hate. Rows and columns, not very good for social. Funny little wiggly lines are in my book. And when I talk about, however, and I always say to people, when I talk about SP21, I'm not talking about selling a spreadsheet, I'm talking about a place. Because that's what really matters.
You mentioned the word purpose, and I want to come back to that, because I think purpose in measurement is incredibly important. I mean, just to say, there is a lot of guidance already out there for small, voluntary, purely volunteer-run organisations about starting off on this stuff. And so, there's guidance from SE UK, there's guidance from Social Value UK, there's guidance from a collaborative project called Inspiring Impact. Full disclosure, I'm involved in that project, but that's about actually having conversations with boards or volunteer teams and actually going through a process of thinking about, well, why would we collect data and what would we use that for and what have we already got and where's the value, and let's talk to people and starting off. So I completely agree. If you start off with measurement tools, you're in the wrong place. I think you need to start off with that process. But have we got any other hands arising with questions? There's one at the back there, and then maybe we'll come back to purpose.
Do you have any comments about how big data, and particularly this issue of comparing your data with public data, which I really liked. Do you have any examples of how organisations are doing that better to actually get the improving impact, either because it's such a big impact they have moved the needle and that is shown in other data that others collect, or by not doing a control trial, but being able to compare something that's going on in their domain with bigger national or regional district data?
So the question, just to repeat for those watching, is around really getting to impact data, really proving impact perhaps, and whether or not big data, open data ultimately can help us with that. Who wants to take on that small challenge?
Can I start? I can give you an example from the international development scene, which is Global Giving run a program called Recording Real Lives. So it starts off from a perspective where lots of the way in which they gather the impact stories at a very granular level is based around stories. It's based around a conversation that says, I was helped by this person to do this and I feel great about it. And they collected about 40,000 of those stories and worked out through something called sentiment analysis, whether they were positive stories or negative stories, whether they included a person or a place and what the important features were. And that meant from collecting all of those stories, which were really important on an individual basis for the key workers in those activities. From an organisational level, they could see how they could see which projects were most successful, what the characteristics were of the most successful projects, and how they could then compare that with their other programs. It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing because it starts with. The other reason it's so beautiful is it starts with very purposeful tool for the individuals collecting their stories, as well as something as an organisation they can compare their overall impact. recording real lives.
Great. Other thoughts about?
Yeah, I think, there's two, I think, distinct questions there maybe. One is, for one organisation, which is a UK-based one, but I think it's easier in the UK, but they particularly supported young people, and we basically uploaded like the indices of deprivation in there. So immediately they knew what the percentage was of number of young people they were supporting within deprived communities. So they could immediately adjust, flex their engagement model to make sure they were engaging with the right number of percentage. So being able to sort of correlate and evaluate on that level about impact in terms of who you're reaching is prevalent. And obviously, I think getting that impact data back into your system through various ways is important. I think on an international level, there are definitely examples of international funders who give out grants to projects across the world in developing countries, and we've also worked with delivery organisations internationally who collect stories. I think is often a great one, but also quantitative stats as well, and pulling those back into the system. So if you work internationally, getting a system as your end goal that will collect all that data for you, both qualitative and quantitative data, is going to be what you want to demonstrate impact. And it goes back to what you measure again in terms of impact.
I think there's a question out there about whether or not proving impact actually is ever really possible. We work in the social sector. We're not in the business of experiments in labs. And the big debate, whether it's in international development or domestically, about, do we contribute to outcomes or can we attribute impact to ourselves? And any of the maps that I'm sure you'll have seen in your work of individuals and the multiple organisations they're connected to, who are all looking at their little piece of the puzzle, I think that's a huge challenge for us as a field to wake up to whether or not actually we're taking a fundamentally user-centric approach to understanding impact, which has to be where the real kind of learning is, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a really brilliant TED talk. I want to say it's by someone called Hans Rosling. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Who demonstrates...
The population guy.
Yeah, who uses just amazing stats to show things like decreasing world poverty and increasing worldwide healthcare and all these kind of things that we obviously we're always concerned about the problems we're trying to address. He's got a great kind of a worldwide overview using global data sets to show progress made. It's worth a watch just to be inspired about what can be achieved when you really understand the data that's available. It's not an answer to your question, it's the other end, I guess, which is we can show collective impact in those ways. I don't know how we can attribute it to an individual.
My contribution to this will be similar but different in as much as we've got about 20-something thousand people working for us in the Middle East who are mostly migrant workers. 97% of them are not Middle Eastern nationals or European, South African, American, whatever they are. Migrant workers largely from the Indian subcontinent and so on. Trying to understand our impact that we have in terms of social value created in that community there is something that we can do around collecting data around their health and accidents and safety and skills and bits and pieces. But the reason that they have chosen to come and work for us, and some of them have been working for us in that part of the world for over 30 years, is because they send 90% of their money home. So what we've got to do is look at the impact that it has there. And that's, again, very challenging. And a lot of it comes just down to talking to the people that we have working for us and saying, okay, what are your stories? And then trying to extrapolate them. But impact measurement, again, the spatial component of that is it's an awfully long way away from life in Dubai for these people, or in Oman, or wherever it is. So we've got to think about that. And also the contextual piece, the public data set outside the developed world is really broad. It's not very granular. There is not a lot of detailed information. Quite a lot of it is suspect. It's very patchy. And it is mapped at, looking at it at a global scale for the UN is great. But actually, when you try and look at a particular community in a particular bit of Kerala, is quite hard.
Dan, you wanted to come in, and then I want to...
One more level example. It's got the best title of any project. It's the Great British Public Toilet Map. .com. No, check it out. It's wonderful. It maps, as you might expect from the title, every single public toilet in the country. And it was set up by the RCA and a charity that focuses on people who have incontinence. So they wanted to know where the public toilets were. So they want to understand how you can provide support materials to those people so that when you go to somewhere new, you can find the nearest public toilet. So the mapping thing is quite cool. It's an individual on your phone, wherever you're someone new, whether you're a new parent or you have incontinence, you can find out very quickly where the nearest toilet is. Lovely use of data. The organisation behind it, though, is a campaigning organisation who wants to support people who have incontinence by placing more public toilets in the relevant areas. So they not only have the data of where the toilets are, they also have the data of where people are from their client group and where they go where there are no toilets, which they can then use data to support their lobbying. There's something really interesting about that kind of dual use of data, which is very, very specific, targeted to help the beneficiaries, the communities we're supporting, and help us as an organisation act on their behalf. So it's another part to kind of bring the two together.
Which I think really nicely brings us back to, and I think we've got to close in a few minutes, to the purpose. Why do we do this? Why do we collect data? Maybe we are stamp collectors. We just want to collect this stuff for the hell of it, certainly some of us. But what's the purpose of social value data, of impact data? And I think for social sector organisations, we tend to talk about, so there's one about learning and improving, and that's got to be absolutely central, because actually that's a way of making sure we're doing the best job for the people we're there to serve. We've got to hold ourselves accountable, because we're not here for our organisations, we're there on someone else's behalf. And that's absolutely critical. And how we do that is very interesting, how we allow people through the data we collect to hold ourselves accountable. And yes, we want to communicate it, and we want to fundraise, and we want to market our work, and we want to help other people make decisions about us. But the order of those different priorities and purposes can be a real challenge to decipher. So I think you've seen a really nice example there of a certain type of data that can be both valuable to a user group and also to advocate on their behalf. But in a world where a lot of what we do is defined by how we can get funded and commissioned and win tenders and grants, how do we work out this thing around purpose? Any ideas to help us close off on, if you're trying to work out your approach to data or those that you support, how can you help people to focus on the most important purposes? Heather, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. I think it goes back to your first point. I think it's foremost thinking about what is your mission as an organisation, and can you tell the story in both stats and case studies about what you've achieved. And what you don't want to be is leaning too much on the case studies if you haven't quite got the stats. And I think it's important that your organisation mission is clear to any stakeholder, and actually we shouldn't be just driven by funding, because quite often when I have organisations come on our impact workshop, they're like, well, we just collect what our funders want. And that's where it's like, okay, well, that's a great place, but let's just go back to what you're about. So everybody's very clear on the purpose of the organisation, and everybody's getting a sense of what that organisation is achieving, because that's why we do what we do, and why we run a non-profit, and why people volunteer and people engage. And the funder will come as part of that package. So I don't think it should be just about funding. I think it's about just doing things and being accountable and transparent and feeling the impact of what we do.
Matt, in a business, is that how
It's
does that
exactly
differ?
the same as anybody else. I mean, we use different language around it, but we will talk about winning work. I mean, but the bottom line is nobody's ever given us a contract because they liked the stats. They've given us a contract because they liked us, and they liked the numbers, and they liked the business, and they liked the story that we had to tell. It is always about stories. I mean, I work for Tim Hayward, who is our CFO. So I report to him. That's where sustainability sits, where social value sits, underneath the principal bean counter. He's talking this afternoon about, can accountants save the world? He obviously believes they can. It was referred to in Peter's speech earlier on. But he started off our sustainability journey. We're going to measure everything, because that's what I understand. And now we talk about tracking everything and understanding everything and being able to tell stories about what we do. It isn't about data. It isn't about stats. They're an important part of the journey to the end point. But you've always got to come back to the purpose. And the purpose for us is about winning work. It's about telling our story. It's about change. I come back to confidence for change. If you can evidence the need to change, because you can get people to understand some of this really big stuff, you can change faster. Yesterday we had a really big debate in our sustainabilities board about change. And the underlying tenet was people weren't confident didn't have the courage to make the change because they couldn't understand the picture. So my job was to go away and find a way of demonstrating to them that this was a good thing to do. So we want to accelerate change with better understanding, and that's underpinned by data. But rarely do I show people a set of data. I normally give them a map or something else to show, an infographic, something else that actually gives understanding and confidence to move things forward, to either reward a contract or to make a change.
Great. And Dan, coming back to purpose.
So we spend quite a lot of time working with grant makers, trying to help them think through the role of digital in their work. One of the stories we tell quite a lot is how technology has changed other parts of our lives. And then we look at how technology is funded in other parts of our lives, technology ventures. If you look at kind of really big things, Twitter, let's take that. They had millions and millions of users before they'd even figured out what their business model could be. They had no idea. And they'd been going for 4 or 5 years before they'd understood what their business model could be. They'd also had millions and millions of pounds poured in, but it was poured in because they had confidence that with that many people using Twitter, they could figure out a way to monetize it, and they have. If we take that principle to social tech, or the use of technology in our world, very often at the end of year 1 of a project, we're asked to prove our business model, our social impact, and how we're getting lots of people involved. And it's kind of impossible. Social impact is a thing for something brand new. The projects we support, we don't expect them to really realise social value for 5 years. So that means year 1, we're looking for indicators to give us confidence we're heading in that right direction. Now, the reason I share that is I'm working really hard with funders and trying to help them think about this journey, that they need to be looking at stuff that gives them confidence to continue funding by looking at user value and financial value and some social value. And that's why I think for us it's about making sure we're capturing those things and using all of those metrics to say, look, we've got this brilliant theory of change. We're not going to prove it for 3 years, but look how many people are engaged with what we're doing. Look at how many other funders or businesses or local authorities are excited by what we're doing. We're taking those 2 proxy measures to give us confidence that in 3 years' time we will have improved hundreds of lives or millions of lives. So for me, it's the mixture of those different metrics, all helping us improve our behaviours and our actions until in 5 years' time we'll be celebrating the social data that we improve.
Fantastic. So to focus on purpose, make sure you come back to mission, use data to tell stories and to give confidence to change, be patient and be really, really clear and focused on the user value. And so for my last word, I often think that all of this stuff around measurement and data gets turned into this technical, very complex field where actually, you know, what do social entrepreneurs do? They listen and understand and respond to what they see in a community. They innovate, they create, but they're listening and responding and developing something and trying it out. And if they're good, they're still listening and responding and iterating. And it's just that. So as Dan tells that story about, you know, kind of assume it's broken and you need to keep on fixing it, so you need to be listening. And I think ultimately that's all that this is about. It's about making sure that we're systematically listening to the people that we're supposed to be there to represent. And actually telling a story back to them around this is what we think, is that right, is a great way of listening. So measurement, I think, when it's done right, is a fantastically strengthening part of an organisation. And if it feels like a burden, it's not right. So on that note, thank you very much to our brilliant panellists. If we can do the usual way to thank them. And thank you for being here and for the questions. And please do grab them and ask them the more detailed questions you want to now. Thank you.